It had been years since I last set foot on the estate, years spent lecturing across Europe in galleries, archives, and libraries, studying the great minds of architecture. But I hadn't forgotten the feel of the French countryside, the weight of the air, and the sweeping vistas of vineyards that surrounded the Lefebvre estate. The grand house hidden behind its towering wrought iron gates stood like a relic from another era, a time when hope and ambition still held sway in the hands of those who believed in the lasting power of their craft. When I first arrived here, the world had been my husband's canvas, and I was simply the one who loved him enough to help him bring his vision to life. But all of that felt like a distant memory now. I had returned finally to what was supposed to be my sanctuary. The estate, once teeming with laughter and endless possibilities, now stood silent and cold. I had always imagined this place would be my refuge, a place to retire, a place to grow old in peace. I never thought I'd return to find it in such a state of disrepair. The gardens were overgrown, the fountain dry, and the once immaculate marble steps leading to the front door now cracked and weathered. It seemed as if the house had suffered in my absence, neglected by those who were meant to cherish it. But it wasn't the house that caused the ache in my chest. It was what I saw as I drove up the winding path to the front door. 3 unfamiliar cars sat in my driveway, their tires slick from the rain. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, carried on the wind from the wide-open terrace. And when I stepped out of my car, I could already smell it, the greasy scent of burnt food wafting from the kitchen. The scent of things left too long, left to rot. I stood frozen at the threshold keys, trembling in my hand, as if I'd just discovered some terrible secret I wasn't meant to see. The sight before me was so utterly foreign, so completely at odds with the sanctuary I had spent decades creating, that I almost couldn't believe it. My son Lucien stood on the terrace, his back to me. He had always been handsome, tall, with sharp features that had only grown more defined with age. But now, as he turned to face me, there was something else in his eyes. A flicker of annoyance, a flash of guilt that vanished just as quickly. His wife, Margaux, stood next to him, dressed in a tailored outfit that screamed money and entitlement. She looked at me with the practiced indifference of someone who had long ago stopped pretending to care about anyone but herself. Mother Lucien said, his voice so cold it felt like ice on my skin. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed the words that rose in my throat, pushing them down before they could escape. I didn't want to yell, didn't want to show them the fire that burned in my chest. I had spent so many years building this place, filling it with the echoes of love and sacrifice, only to have it stripped away by the very people I had cared for the most. But here I was, standing in the place that was once mine, being treated like an outsider in my own home. "This is my house, Lucien," I said, my voice quivering only slightly, but I could feel the power in those words. They were my words. My house. I've been coming here for over 20 years, since your father passed. I didn't know you'd taken it over. He scoffed a humorless laugh that made my skin crawl. "Oh, please," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We thought we'd make use of it. It's just sitting here empty all the time, so we're taking care of things. This place is too big for one person, and you're always in Paris or New York. It's not like you need it." My heart tightened in my chest, a lump forming in my throat. How could he say that? How could he treat this house like a piece of property, like a tool to be used for his convenience? "Lucien," I said, trying to steady my breathing, but the words came out like a whisper. "This is not just a house. This was your father's dream. My dream. It's where we raised you, where you learned to walk, where we celebrated Christmases and birthdays. You can't just—" I stopped myself, but it was already too late. The words had tumbled out unbidden like water over a cliff. Lucien's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "And what exactly do you want me to do about it, Mother?" He crossed his arms, his voice rising. "We need the space. You can't just hold on to everything forever. Margaux and I have our own family now. We need this house." The words stung, but it was the finality in his tone that hit hardest. As if everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed to give him this life didn't matter anymore. As if I was nothing but a relic from the past, someone who had outlived her usefulness. I looked over at Margaux standing there with her cold, calculating eyes watching me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. I'd always known she never liked me. She'd never really cared for the legacy I represented, for the old-world values of family and love that had built this house. But now she stood beside Lucienne like a queen, like she had the right to decide what happened here. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "we thought you'd be happy to have us here. You've always wanted the family together, haven't you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them everything I was feeling, to expose the deep hurt, the betrayal that had festered inside me for so long. But something inside me, something I hadn't known was there, held me back. I wasn't just angry, I was defeated. My own son, the one I had raised, the one I had poured my heart and soul into, was turning his back on everything I had worked for. "I don't know what happened to you, Lucien," I said softly, trying to find some semblance of calm, "but I built this place for you, for us. I never expected you to throw it away." He didn't answer, but his eyes, those eyes that had once looked at me with such love, were now filled with something else, something darker. And as I stood there, the keys still trembling in my hand, I knew that the battle for this house wasn't just about the property, it was about something deeper. It was about everything that had been broken between us. And no matter what I did, I couldn't fix it anymore. The following days were a blur of numbness and confusion, as though the house I had once built with love and hard work was no longer mine. The estate, once a haven of memories, now felt like a prison, with its walls closing in around me. I spent hours in my study staring out the window at the garden I had nurtured, now overrun with weeds and disorder. I had worked so hard for this legacy, and yet here I was, an unwelcome visitor in my own home. I tried to make sense of it all, to grasp the reality of what Lucien and Margaux were doing, but it felt as if I were caught in some horrible dream I couldn't wake up from. The first time I truly confronted them about what they had been doing was at breakfast, though breakfast felt like a farce. The grand dining room with its elegant wooden table and the soft glow of the chandelier should have been a place of warmth, of shared stories and laughter. But instead, it had become a battleground, a place where my heart sank every time I looked at Lucien sitting there as though nothing were wrong, as though we were still a family. Lucien sat across from me, his face as composed as ever, but there was something in his eyes that made me feel both betrayed and powerless. He knew what he had done, and yet he acted as though he hadn't shattered everything. Margaux, on the other hand, wore a faint smile that seemed more like a smirk, as if she had already won. The porcelain cups and saucers clinked as they lifted their coffee, their quiet chatter, in stark contrast to the rising storm inside me. The tension thickened the air, suffocating and thick. "Lucien," I said, my voice trembling slightly but firm. "I need to understand what's happening here. Why are you doing this to me? To the estate?" Margaux's eyes flashed with something I couldn't place, but Lucien looked at me with that same carefully controlled expression. I could see the guilt flickering behind his eyes, but it was overshadowed by his resolve. He leaned forward, folding his hands together on the table. "It's not about you, Mother," he said, his voice low but steady. "This house is too big for just one person. It's a financial burden. We've been looking into the estate's value, and quite frankly, we could do a lot more with it than just let it sit here and gather dust." Gather dust. His words felt like a slap. It was as if the years of my labor, of my husband's vision of our lives spent together here, had been reduced to a mere investment, a property to be sold off and exploited for cash. I built this house with my own hands, Lucian, I said, trying to keep the crack in my voice under control. This house was never just a place, it was a symbol of everything I did for you. Your father worked tirelessly to make sure you had this future, and now you're telling me it's just a house. Mother, don't. Lucian interjected, his voice suddenly sharp. Don't try to turn this into something it's not. We need this. You can't keep holding on to something that doesn't serve us anymore. And what about what I need, Lucian? I shot back my chest, tightening with the weight of my words. What about the years I spent in this house giving everything I had so that you could have a good life? Do I mean nothing to you now? Have you really forgotten what this place means to me? He didn't respond immediately, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. For a moment, it seemed like the walls between us might come down, like he might finally see reason. But then Margaux spoke, her voice smooth and deliberate, like a velvet glove hiding a sharpened blade. You're being unreasonable, Clara, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. We're not saying you have to leave. We're saying the house needs to be used. If you truly care about your legacy, then you should let us do what's best for it. Let us modernize it. Bring it into the future. Let it pay for itself. I was stunned, unable to speak for a moment. Modernize it. Pay for itself. It wasn't enough that they had started selling off pieces of my husband's collection of furniture, the art that had been passed down through the generations. Now they wanted to take everything I had worked for and turn it into a commodity, a money-making venture. You don't get it, do you? I finally said, my voice rising despite myself. This isn't just about the house. This is about respect. This is about what we've built together as a family, you and your wife. You've taken something that wasn't yours to take. You think you can just rip apart our history for the sake of convenience, but it doesn't work like that. Margaux laughed softly, but it was hollow, lacking the warmth she had once pretended to show me. Clara, you're being emotional. This isn't about history. This is about survival. We have debts to pay, a future to secure. And you... She gestured around the room as though the estate itself were a burden. You're just sitting here letting everything slip away. You have a responsibility too. A responsibility to your family. I felt the sting of her words like a knife in my side. Responsibility to whom? To the family who had betrayed me, who thought they could erase everything I had fought for with the stroke of a pen. I swallowed back the bitter taste of betrayal that rose in my throat. I could see it now, the truth behind the charade. They weren't trying to save the estate. They were trying to take it from me piece by piece until there was nothing left. And if I refuse... I asked, my voice suddenly calm, though my hands trembled on the edge of the table. What happens then? Lucian's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might explode. But instead, he remained eerily quiet, eyes burning with a kind of cold, unyielding resolve. He wasn't angry. He was determined, and that made it all the more dangerous. You have no choice, Mother, he said, his tone low and final. We've already started the process. The lawyers are involved. If you fight us, we'll take this to court. You'll lose. You'll be left with nothing but the memory of what you once had. I felt my heart sink, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The weight of his words crushed me, but I refused to let him see it, refused to let him see that he had gotten to me. I see, I said, standing up abruptly. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor was jarring in the stillness. So this is what you want. You want me to just hand it all over to you. You want me to roll over and give up everything I've worked for. Lucian and Margaux exchanged a look, one I couldn't read, and then Lucian stood up as well, his face hard as stone. Sometimes that's what's best, he said simply. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my heart pounding in my chest, the anger and frustration building with every step. How had it come to this? How had my own son, my flesh and blood, become the very person who would tear down everything I had built? everything his father had created. As I walked through the hallway past the pictures of us of our family, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. The estate was more than just bricks and mortar. It was our history, our lives. And Lucien and Margaux were determined to destroy it. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. The next few days were like a storm rolling and dark and heavy with the weight of what was coming. I didn't sleep much. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the faces of Lucien and Margaux, their cold smiles, the contempt in their eyes. My house felt more like a prison than ever before, the walls closing in as they continued to chip away at the foundation of everything I had worked for. It was as though the very air had changed the familiar comfort of this place, replaced by a suffocating tension that I could hardly bear. I knew what had to be done, but that didn't make it any easier. What choice did I have but to fight back? The only question was how and with whom. I had never been one to back down from a fight, but this was different. This wasn't just some legal battle over money or assets. It was a battle for my life, for the years I had spent building something that mattered, something I could leave behind when I was gone. And now, Lucien and Margaux were taking it all away from me piece by piece like thieves in the night. The first step was clear. I had to hire a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with Lucien's financial backers, someone who could understand the gravity of what was at stake. And when I called Thomas Gallagher, I could hear the confidence in his voice that I needed. He was sharp, experienced, and not easily intimidated. The moment I spoke to him, I knew he was the right choice. By the time I met him in his office, I had gathered everything, every document, every piece of evidence that could prove the house was mine, that I had the legal right to stand my ground. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about the life my husband and I had built here, the sweat, the blood, the tears we'd shed. Every brick in this house had a story. Every painting had a memory. But I knew the law didn't care about memories, and so I had to make them care. Thomas was exactly as I had imagined, calm, meticulous, and deeply attuned to the nuances of family law. When I walked into his office, he didn't waste any time. I could see the way his eyes scanned the pile of documents I placed on the table, the faint flicker of understanding crossing his face as he began to piece together what I was up against. "Mrs. Lefebvre," he said, "after reviewing the papers, you have a strong case. It's clear to me that your son and his wife have made several mistakes here, and not just legally. They've underestimated you, and that's a mistake they're going to regret." I couldn't help but feel a surge of relief, but also something else, something darker. A sense of justice, maybe, but also a realization of just how far I had to go. This was no longer just a dispute between family members. It was a war, one that I hadn't wanted to fight, but was now forced into. And if I was going to win, I had to fight with everything I had. We spent hours going over every detail, the forged documents, the fraudulent property transfer request, the phony medical reports they had submitted to have me declared mentally incompetent. All of it was proof of their manipulation. I had never been so disgusted in my life, but now I wasn't going to let them get away with it, not without making them face the consequences. By the end of the meeting, I felt like I had finally regained some control over the situation. Thomas laid out a plan of action. The first step would be to file for immediate eviction. The trespassers, Lucien and Margaux, had no legal right to be in the house, let alone make changes or begin selling off the estate's assets. We would also be reporting the stolen property, my jewelry, my late husband's watch, the silver heirlooms. And if that wasn't enough, Thomas assured me we could go after them for fraud, for conspiracy, for everything they had done to me in an attempt to strip me of what was rightfully mine. "You've been betrayed, Mrs. Lefebvre Thomas," said his voice steady. "But you're not powerless. This isn't just about the house. This is about your dignity, your legacy, and we're going to make sure it's protected." The weight of his words stayed with me as I walked out of his office. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't going to be easy. In fact, I knew it would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But I had been through so much in my life, so many losses, so many heartaches. Losing my home wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. The following morning, I woke early, determined to put my plan into motion. I walked through the house, taking in everything I could, every detail of what they had done, how they had turned my sanctuary into their playground. I knew I had to document everything, take photos, collect evidence. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home. This was about making sure no one ever underestimated me again. I started with the garden. It had always been my pride and joy, the roses, the peonies, the lavender. It was my place of peace where I would spend hours working, lost in the quiet joy of planting. But now the garden was overrun with weeds, the flowers trampled underfoot. The fountain had been drained, the bird bath shattered. It was as if they had come in and intentionally destroyed everything I held dear. I walked through the rooms one by one. The dining room, where we'd celebrated Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries, now a cluttered mess with furniture hastily rearranged and half-eaten plates left on the table. The living room, once a haven of warmth and comfort, was unrecognizable. There were beer cans strewn across the floor, dirty towels thrown carelessly across the chairs. Margaux's expensive perfume still hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the musty smell of neglect. But it wasn't just the disarray that bothered me. It was the way they had treated everything with such disregard, as though none of it mattered. My husband's prized collection of paintings, hung with care on the walls, had been moved, shoved into corners like unwanted relics. The antique furniture I had lovingly restored was now covered in dust, its beauty obscured by the mess. And my personal belongings, my jewelry, my keepsakes had been rifled through as though they were nothing more than items to be sold off. I walked up the stairs, the creak of the old wood beneath my feet a familiar comfort. But when I reached the top, the sight that greeted me made my stomach turn. My bedroom, once a place of rest and sanctuary, was now a battleground. The bed, once crisp with clean linens, was covered in dirty sheets, children's toys scattered across the floor. Margaux's mother, who had come to stay for the weekend, had taken over the closet, rifling through my clothes as if they were hers to pick over. I couldn't believe it. My own family, my flesh and blood, had turned my home into a circus, treating my most sacred space with utter disrespect. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. I called Thomas and told him everything I had found. He was quiet on the other end of the line, taking it all in, but I could hear the resolve in his voice when he spoke. "We'll move forward with the eviction filing today," he said, "and we'll make sure the police are involved. I don't want anyone else in that house until we're done. You've been more than patient, Mrs. Lefebvre. It's time to take action." As the day wore on, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The battle ahead would be long, but I had the law on my side, and I had something even more powerful, my own strength. I wasn't the helpless woman they thought I was. I wasn't the aging mother they could walk all over. I had built this life, this house, and I was going to protect it no matter the cost. That evening, as I sat alone in the parlor, I looked around one last time, taking in the beautiful ruined home that had been my everything. But even in the face of all the destruction, I knew one thing for sure: this was not the end. This was only the beginning. And when it was all over, when I had won this battle, they would understand exactly who they were dealing with. They had underestimated me before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind, a blur of legal jargon meetings and endless phone calls with Thomas Gallagher. Each conversation with him strengthened my resolve, and yet each one also exposed the rawness of the situation, just how deeply Lucienne and Margaux had hurt me, how far they had gone in their attempts to strip me of everything I held dear. But I had no time to wallow in the sting of betrayal. I had to keep moving forward. The process had begun in earnest. The eviction papers had been filed, and Thomas had ensured that we had the full weight of the law behind us. There were days when I couldn't even bring myself to step into certain rooms of the house, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the violation, the way they had trampled over the memories that had taken root here. But even in the darkest moments, I knew that I couldn't allow myself to be consumed by grief. This wasn't just about my home. It was about something far more significant, my autonomy, my dignity, my life's work. I had always prided myself on being self-sufficient, on standing tall, no matter the circumstances. But now, in the face of this betrayal, I was being forced to confront the darker side of family ties, the way that the people we love most can at times become the greatest threats to our peace. My son, the one I had nurtured, the one I had raised alone after my husband's death, had become a stranger. And Margaux, with her icy smile and her sense of entitlement, had made it clear that nothing mattered to her but her own advancement. I couldn't escape the feeling that this battle was about far more than property. It was about reclaiming the integrity of my own identity. Still, despite the shock and hurt, I knew that this was a fight I couldn't afford to lose. And so I began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Lucien, a confrontation that was coming whether I liked it or not. It was only a matter of time before he would confront me, attempt to negotiate, or perhaps try to manipulate me once again. But this time, I wouldn't bend. It was on a cool, overcast morning that I finally saw Lucien's car pull into the driveway. My stomach twisted with nerves. But when I stepped onto the front steps to greet him, I was met with the cold, hard look in his eyes, a look that mirrored the one I had seen so many times in the last few weeks. The warm, familiar son I had known was no longer there. In his place stood a man who had lost his moral compass, who had made a choice, and who was now living with the consequences. Mother. He said, his voice low, almost mechanical. I didn't think you'd take it this far. What are you hoping to accomplish with all of this? I stood there, my arms crossed, trying to steady myself. I'm hoping to reclaim what's mine, Lucien. This house, this life, it's all I have left, and you can't take it from me. Not like this. He didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the estate, as though he was already looking for ways to pick it apart, even in this moment of confrontation. The air between us was thick with unsaid words, years of tension, and a growing divide that I couldn't see how to bridge. I never asked for this. He finally muttered, his tone more resigned than defensive. I didn't want this to be the way things turned out. But you wouldn't listen. You just kept holding on to everything. You wouldn't let go. I almost laughed a bitter laugh that caught in my throat. Let go. You mean give up everything I've worked? For everything your father built? Is that what you want me to do, Lucien? Let it all go for what? For your so-called future. His face darkened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You think you know what's best for me, for this family? His voice cracked for the first time, and I could see the frustration bubbling over. I've sacrificed so much, and you've never once supported me. Everything I do, you criticize. All I wanted was to build something, to make something of myself. You had this place all to yourself, and you did nothing but keep it locked away, wasting it. It took everything in me not to lash out at him. The nerve of it. All the years I spent raising him, working for him, building this life, and now he was standing here, telling me that my very existence had been a waste. But I held my ground, standing tall, despite the hurt. No, Lucien, I said, my voice steady but laced with pain. I didn't keep it locked away. I built this for you, for us. Your father and I built this life with everything we had. And you, I paused, swallowing the emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. You're throwing it all away. You think I'm the one holding on to the past, but it's you who's so desperate to escape it, to erase it all, just so you can feel like you've accomplished something. His face flushed with anger, but his voice was quiet when he spoke again. "And you think I'm doing this just for the money, just for a few pieces of property? You don't understand, Mother. Margaux and we're drowning. This house, it's a burden. I can't carry it anymore." The words stung not because of the content, but because of the way they revealed just how far he had fallen, how willing he was to sacrifice everything, even the dignity of his own family, just to free himself from the weight of responsibility. It was like a punch in the gut. I had always known that Lucien had his flaws, but to hear him speak this way, to know that he had lost sight of everything we had stood for, was almost too much to bear. "I'm not asking you to carry it alone," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I never was. But you've let greed blind you, Lucien. You've let your ambition consume you, and in the process, you've lost sight of what truly matters." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of our words hung in the air, the distance between us stretching farther than the grounds of the estate. But Lucien didn't seem to have the will to argue further. He simply turned and walked back toward his car, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was the truth, however hard it was to accept. In the days that followed, the legal battle began in earnest. The eviction was filed and the process was set into motion. It wasn't as fast as I had hoped, but with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I should try to reconcile with Lucien, let go of the fight, and let him have what he wanted. But then I would look out at the estate, the gardens, the rooms filled with memories, and I would remember why I had fought so hard for this place, for the legacy of my husband, and for my own future. The court hearings dragged on, but as the case unfolded, more and more evidence piled up in my favor. Lucien and Margaux had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. The documents they had forged, the property transfers they had attempted, all of it came to light. And with each passing day, their arrogance began to crumble. Then came the day when it all came to a head, the final court ruling the moment I had been waiting for. I stood in the courtroom, my hands steady, despite the butterflies in my stomach, as the judge read the verdict. Lucien and Margaux sat across from me, their faces a mixture of frustration and disbelief. They had tried to pull every trick in the book, but it wasn't enough. The judge ruled in my favor. The property was mine, and the fraudulent documents were nullified. Lucien and Margaux were ordered to pay restitution for the stolen assets, and they were given a criminal record for their part in the scheme. The case was over. It was a victory. But as I stood there, I realized it was a hollow one. I had won, yes, but at what cost? I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. What I felt was empty. The sense of loss so profound it left a pit in my stomach. Lucien had betrayed me, and Margaux had never cared about me. The relationship I had spent years building had been destroyed in an instant. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. But as I stepped into the fresh air, I realized that while I may have lost my son, while I may have lost the idea of family that I had clung to for so long, I hadn't lost myself. I was still Eleanor Lefebvre, the woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had stood strong in the face of every challenge life had thrown her way. And with that thought, I knew something deep in my bones I would survive this. Whatever else came, I would survive. And the estate. It would be mine again, just as it had always been. The aftermath of the court ruling settled heavily on me like a thick fog obscuring everything I had once believed in. Yes, I had won. Yes, the law had sided with me, but I was left standing alone in the wreckage of my family. The victory wasn't sweet. It didn't taste like justice. It tasted like ashes, like the end of something irreplaceable. What was the point of reclaiming this house, of holding on to the physical legacy, when I had lost my son in the process? What was the point of protecting something built with love and sweat when it had cost me my very connection to the one person I had given everything for? As I walked back to the estate, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the sound of nature still carrying on, unaffected by the chaos I had just survived. The gardens I had so lovingly tended to were now overgrown, a shadow of their former selves. The flowers that once bloomed with vibrant colors were wilting, and the hedges that had once framed the house so beautifully had grown wild. It was as though everything I had worked for was being swallowed by time, by neglect, by the very forces I had been trying to keep at bay. But this time, something in me shifted. I wasn't just a woman fighting to protect her home. I wasn't just a widow holding on to the last vestiges of her late husband's dream. I was a woman who had been betrayed, who had lost her family, and who now had nothing left to lose. It wasn't the house I was fighting for anymore. It was myself. It was the last shred of my dignity, my independence, and my belief that no one could take that from me. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in the restoration of the estate, not because it needed to be done for anyone else but me, but because the work gave me a sense of control, a way to hold on to something that was still mine. I started with the garden, clearing away the overgrowth, pulling out the weeds, and trimming the bushes that had become unruly in my absence. The work was exhausting, physically demanding, but with every plant I restored, I felt a bit of the heaviness lift. It was as if I was reclaiming not just the house, but my place in the world, one flower bed at a time. I could have hired help, but I didn't want that. I didn't want anyone else's hands on my legacy. The more I worked, the more I realized that the true value of the estate wasn't in its marble floors or the priceless art pieces hanging on the walls. It was in the quiet moments, in the blood, sweat, and tears that had gone into creating it. This house was mine, my husband's, my son's once, but now it was only mine, and that had to be enough. I took pride in every detail. The stained glass windows that I had carefully chosen, the antique furniture I had restored piece by piece, the grand oak table where we had all sat together, where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. These were the things that mattered. These were the things I could hold on to. And yet, even as I repaired the walls, tended the gardens, and dusted off the old furniture, I couldn't shake the sense of loss. Lucienne was gone. Margaux was gone. Even the idea of family, the idea of us all together in this place, was gone. I wasn't sure what had happened to him. Lucien had never come back to the house after the verdict. He hadn't sent a message, a note, or even a phone call. Nothing. He had cut me off completely, and a part of me was crushed by that. My son, the one I had raised from a baby, the one I had sacrificed everything for, had abandoned me without a second thought. I had always known that Lucien had flaws, that he wasn't perfect, but this betrayal was something I never could have prepared for. The boy I had once held in my arms, the one I had comforted after every scraped knee, the one I had sent off to college with hope and pride, had now become a stranger. And Margaux, she had never been part of the family, not really. She had always been cold, distant, a woman of ambition more than affection. When she first married Lucien, I had tried to make her feel welcome. I had gone out of my way to include her, to make her a part of our lives. But I had always sensed something in her, a kind of entitlement, a need to control everything around her. It wasn't surprising that she had gone along with Lucienne's plans to take the estate. It was never about the house for her. It was always about power, about securing a future for herself no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led me to this point. I had given everything for my family. I had built this house with my hands alongside my late husband, piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now, in the blink of an eye, it had all been taken from me. But I wasn't going to let them have the last word. I wasn't going to let them walk away without facing the consequences of their actions. I had always prided myself on being self-sufficient, on standing tall, no matter the circumstances. But now, for the first time in my life, I realized that self-sufficiency wasn't just about managing money, maintaining a house, or providing for a family. It was about being strong enough to face the hardest truths, to stand alone when necessary, and to not let anyone, no matter how much they tried to tear you down, take away your sense of self-worth. There was something profoundly liberating in that realization. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the loss, I was still Eleanor Lefebvre. I was still the woman who had built this house, who had fought for what was right, and who had stood strong in the face of every challenge life had thrown her way. I didn't need Lucian's approval. I didn't need Margaux's validation. All I needed was to remember who I was and to take back the power they had tried to strip from me. The following month, I decided to do something I had never done before I hired a part-time housekeeper. It wasn't because I couldn't manage the estate on my own. I still did most of the work myself, as I always had, but because I realized that I needed to protect my space. I needed to ensure that no one would ever invade it again without my knowledge. I also changed all the locks on the doors and installed security cameras. It wasn't about fear, it was about control. It was about taking back what had been stolen from me and ensuring that I would never again be blindsided by the people I had loved most. I also updated my will. This was the hardest part. It wasn't just about distributing assets, it was about letting go of the idea that Lucian would ever return to me, that he would ever be the son I had hoped for. I left the house to charity, ensuring that no matter what happened, it would be used for a purpose that aligned with the values I had always believed in. Lucian would never inherit it. Not now. Not after everything. 6 months passed. The house began to feel like home again. It wasn't the same, of course. I couldn't pretend it was, but it was mine, and that was enough. Then one day, I received a letter. It was from Lucian. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. There was no phone call, no visit, just a letter, short and to the point. Mom, I hope you're doing well. The kids ask about you. Megan and I have learned our lesson. Maybe someday we can be a family again. I put the letter down my hands, shaking slightly. There it was. The words I had waited to hear, but too late. The words that would never undo the damage, never erase the hurt. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth was clear. Lucian had made his choice, and I had made mine. I had chosen myself. I had chosen my dignity, my independence, and my right to protect everything I had built. That was all I needed. And with that thought, I finally felt at peace. As I reflect on the journey I've shared with you, the battles fought within my own home, the decisions made in the face of betrayal, and the courage it took to stand firm against the ones I loved most, I am reminded of the power we all hold within ourselves. Every one of us has faced a moment where we felt backed into a corner where everything we believed in was challenged. But it's in those moments of vulnerability that we discover our true strength. For me, it was never about the house, the property, or even the money. It was about maintaining my dignity, protecting my legacy, and ensuring that no one could ever take that from me. If you're reading this and you've faced a similar challenge, whether in family work or personal relationships, know that you're not alone. The journey of reclaiming what is rightfully yours, both physically and emotionally, isn't easy, but it is possible. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing that it's okay to fight for yourself, to put your needs, your values, and your well-being first. This is not just about standing up to others. It's about standing up for yourself and what you believe in. I want to hear from you. How have you found the strength to face your own battles? What have you learned about yourself along the way? Your stories and experiences are invaluable, and by sharing them, we can all find strength in one another. Let's continue this conversation together. Your voice matters, and it's through these shared experiences that we can empower each other to never back down. Thank you for joining me in this journey, for reading, reflecting, and supporting the strength that resides within each of us. Your courage to face your own challenges is the real victory, and I am grateful to have had the chance to share my story with you. Let's keep moving forward no matter what comes our way, because we are stronger than we think, and together we can face anything.